So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to our Halloween special. We're talking today about cyber threats, CVEs, and security risks in open source software. Let's do a few housekeeping items up front, please. This call is being recorded, so please note that we will send out the recording after. Everybody is in listen-only mode, but feel free to use the Q&A channel or the chat channel for asking questions throughout, and we will have a quick Q&A at the end of it. If you encounter any technical difficulties, then please come to the chat and we'll help you out, right? And today I would like to introduce our presenters. We have Martin Stadler, excuse me, SVP of Customer Experience, and Joe Dahlquist, VP of Product Marketing here at Weaveworks. And I'd be happy to hand it over to you, Joe. Kick us off. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Hi, Martin. Thank you so much for joining me too. I'm excited to do this webinar with you and talk about things that are terrifying all of us these days, right? Cybersecurity threats, risk, CVEs, things that, go boom in the night. If you're not familiar with us, we're Weaveworks. We've been around for a number of years, central to the cloud native world, partner with all the major infrastructure and Kubernetes vendors out there. We are head over heels in love with open source and open source communities. We do a lot of work that you may have heard of, EKS Cuddle, Flux, Flagger, all the way back to old projects that we worked on for years. And we've got some really amazing partners and amazing customers that we get to team up with and do amazing things. So we sit like smack dead center in the middle of this thing, just to give everybody kind of like a, here's where we are on the map understanding. We're kind of the gear that turns everything, whether it's your CI/CD, your DevSecOps stuff, all of your teams of app developers, your various sources of truth, your internal developer portals, your runtime, your infrastructure, your observability and monitoring. And we make all of this play nice together and help teams develop software faster, get their changes into the hands of customers more quickly and prevent typical issues that occur when you're trying to go faster doing software development. Got some topics that we're going to talk about today. First, Martin and I are going to jump into kind of the lay of the land, talk about threats and risks. We're going to touch on security and open source software. It seems like every time that there's a big open source security incident, this question comes back up about, commercial off-the-shelf software versus open source software, which is safer, which is more risky. Are there ways to mitigate that? It's an interesting topic, and we'll certainly talk about that a little bit today. We're going to give you an overview on DORA, and I'm not talking about the MTTR and time to change kind of DORA. We're talking about the Digital Operational Resilience Act that was put into law almost a year ago and is going to become effective in just about a year from now. And I can almost guarantee you it's going to impact just about every company, every big company in the world, especially if you're involved in financial services.
Yep.
We'll also do a little demo of, sorry, Martin, jump in.
No, I was just saying, I don't think lots of us really think about things like DORA until suddenly someone from, the corporate regulation, corporate legal comes in and says, how are we meeting these requirements? So.
Exactly. Till you get that FBI knock on the door. Yeah, it's easy to fall asleep at the wheel for things like that, right? But super important. So we'll touch on that a little bit and give you guys some ammunition to be able to be prepared for that. We'll do a quick demo of Weave Gitops Assured if time permits, and talk about how our product, our solution, Weave Gitops Assured, can help you guys address CVEs and some of the open source tools that are near and dear to your heart, like Flux. So without further ado, let's jump on in there. We'll start by talking about business landscape a little bit. I don't know about you, Martin, but it seems like the word of the day for business is more, right? More apps, more products, more bug fixes, more delighted customers, more money, more everything. And that's a That's a difficult thing to deliver on while staying secure and while mitigating risk.
Yeah, I would say that it's in addition to that, it's also with less, right? So we've got to do a lot more with a lot less. So either in cloud spend or cloud utilization, all of the customers we have today, they're trying to figure out, how do I do this in a more cost-effective way, right? So
with fewer people, with fewer tools, with lesser budgets, and yet, you know, they don't want to throttle anything else, right? They want all the results, but they want to put in less and less, and that's the nature of business. So we totally understand that. In fact, I think what we've seen is companies completely redesign their entire operating model to be able to meet customer demands and to be able to meet a more competitive landscape than they've ever seen, right? I think there's an expectation, I certainly have this expectation, that when I'm dealing with my bank, that I want this kind of seamless, unified experience across all of my devices. It doesn't matter whether I'm traveling abroad or whether I'm here at home, whether I'm on my phone or whether I'm on my tablet or my laptop. You know, I have some pretty high expectations that I'm going to have this seamless, consistent experience where changes that I make are reflected immediately in all of the devices that I might be using to interface with my financial services institutions. That's a lot of pressure on software developers and application delivery teams to do a better job faster and in a way that is more seamless for customers. I think we touched on a little bit of the wanting to do more with less, but it is just pervasive. And I think, our economy right now and this looming threat, talk about threats of a recession, just contributes to that, right? I mean, everybody needs to watch their bottom line, and everybody needs to shore up costs and tighten their belts a little bit. And this, but
yeah, I was just going to say, I think one of the things that a lot of organizations are doing now is they're actually taking a hard look and seeing how they can actually shift in light of the threats, the risk, new regulation requirements, trying to get cost control in place. One of the major airlines we're working with right now, they are moving their entire infrastructure from one provider over to something more with another provider and in-house. So how do you do that, right? Because at some point in time, you're going to have 3 different environments you're trying to manage. So your tool sets and the tools technologies that you're relying on need to be, stretch across all 3 of those. So that's one of the
it's easy, right? You tell all your customers to be patient. You turn everything off for a few months. You make your transition, turn the power buttons back on, and you don't miss a beat. And the reality is things like this whole cloud native experience, this whole continuous delivery wave, working with containerized applications and undergoing digital transformation and change to be able to get there. It's all a means to an end of these things that we were just talking about, right? It is about, how do I shore up costs? How do I increase the velocity of software development and getting, the value that we're creating into the hands of customers and business to business partners more quickly, and do it all, right, with less risk, with greater security, and with an eye for compliance. It's a heavy burden that's getting placed on software development and delivery teams, and I feel for them. It's a tough environment.
Yep, absolutely.
Let's kick over to compliance a little bit. So the gum in the works, or a necessary distraction, but we see this year that compliance budgets are going to increase ever so slightly for about 65% of organizations. And at first, my first reaction to this was, wow, that's awesome, right? Like, budgets have been flat for years, maybe for almost a decade when it comes to compliance, and unfortunately for security as well. But I had somebody that works in compliance, a friend of mine, say, Joe, this isn't a good thing. This is a scary thing, because now there's going to be an expectation that we can do more And we're not getting much more budget. We're not going to be able to hire more people. There's a skills shortage that everybody's dealing with. And so there's this oversized expectation now that compliance departments and the teams that help make those wheels turn are going to be more effective, can take on more of a workload. But the reality is they're going to get a couple more bucks in their budget, probably no more people, and they are going to have to endure heightened regulatory restrictions and compliance burdens. And it's just a fact of life, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at we've got two global financial institutions with us right now, working with us. They have had cuts as far as the amount of spend. They have something in the region of about 40%. But at the same time, they've got a 60 to 65% increase in what they have to, some of it driven through things like DORA, but some of what compliance means and what they have to do. So they're looking for tooling that will allow them to adjust for both, right? Both for that cost efficiency and to be able to make something that covers this increased scope of compliance that they have to meet.
It is not only an increased scope, but an increasing scope, right? There's new requirements coming down the pipeline every time you turn around and look. EU's fourth capital requirements directive, market abuse regulation, the fourth anti-money laundering directive, the revised markets and financial instruments directive, MIFID 2. We've got DORA that's coming like day after tomorrow, it feels like. And EU lawmakers are working right now to finalize this new Cyber Resilience Act. And that has some real implications, both for open source maintainers and the companies that use open source. And if anybody out there needs to be dispelled of this truth, I'm happy to do it for it. You might think you're not using open source, but you got open source everywhere. It's in every nook and cranny of your organization. And even those vendor solutions that are commercial off-the-shelf software that are proprietary, they're full of open source dependencies and bits and pieces as well. So it's everywhere. It's not something that can be ignored. Security, again, is incidents on the rise. We're looking right now, based on our trajectory in 2023, at seeing somewhere between about a 7.5% and a 10% increase year over year in cyber attacks, right? Every year, I think we get to this fourth quarter of the year and we say, geez, it was a tough year again for security, Log4Shell and, all sorts of things that make headlines and disrupt companies and their ability to do business. Some fun facts that'll spook everybody for Halloween. 1 in 31 organizations this week are going to have a serious cybersecurity incident. And of those, 90% of them are going to include phishing as a vector of attack, or these days, even more popular, smishing, right? Where you're getting text messages from what looks to be a dubious source asking you to click on a link. It's the most popular attack vector going, and we don't see that letting up. That has been on the rise for the last 6-7 years. Of those attacks, where 90% are going to start as a phishing attack, some 24, almost 25% are going to include some sort of ransomware, right? And when you've got an infection of ransomware, you're going to get a ransom request. The average ransom request in 2023, $7.2 million US, or the equivalent. Now, luckily, some of these are nice guys and can be haggled with a little bit. So the average payout is only $4.2 million. But if you think about that, what companies that you're aware of can handle almost a weekly tune of $4.2 million in ransomware spend, right? To keep the doors open and the wheels turning. To make matters worse, right? Halloween, Thanksgiving, and Christmas are like the time of the year for cybersecurity incidents, and attacks are going to rise over the next few months. And this is all just a part of the more than 800,000 security incidents that are going to be cataloged this year. It's not something that any company can ignore. I see statistics that talk about how 50% of attacks are going to be levied against small businesses, companies with just, fewer than 50 employees. an incident like this can certainly put those kinds of companies right out of business. So security and open source software. Like I mentioned earlier, every time a big incident happens like Log4j, the debate begins about which is more secure. Is OSS more secure than COTS? Is proprietary software more secure than open source stuff? A couple more statistics that I found really interesting that I wanted to share with our audience. In 2022, more than 25,000 new CVEs were discovered, right? And this is the highest it's ever been, right? And we're probably on trend for this to just continue. So every year there's going to be a greater number ever than before of new critical vulnerabilities and exposures that get reported on. But despite the massive use of open source software, only 10% of those CVEs were related to open source. And that's according to CISA's KEV catalog, so the known exploited vulnerabilities catalog. It's an interesting relationship where I think the number of instances of open source software running out there dramatically dwarfs the number of private or proprietary software that's being used by companies, and yet it's typically not OSS that's dealing with CVEs, at least according to the numbers.
Yeah, I think one of the caveats, just quickly,
yeah,
one of the things, Joe, that I found out is that when you are using, so for example, if you have an open source project, a tool that you're using, the upstream project more likely than not runs the CVEs against their project build. What we're finding is, so for example, we've got the tool Flux, right, at Weaveworks.
Mm-hmm.
The CVE testing that they have does not always extend beyond the code that is written by the project itself. So if you think about a way that you're going to build a container to then deliver Flux, there are not just the CVEs that are in the Flux code, but everything else that, some Golang libraries, et cetera, that you'd have in there. So it's that entire image, that entire container image, where you have to really now spend more time to focus in and understand it's not just your CVEs for Flux, it's what's in that container, what that Flux build was built against, understanding that, and then being able to resolve it. That is new understanding broadly within the marketplace of what's required to be done.
That extends to just about everything. I mean,
exactly.
Container OSs, dependencies used to build them, even the programming language, right? There can be vulnerabilities in the language that haven't been addressed in some cases for months or even years at a time. So yeah, that is an incredibly important point to think about, that it might not just be the named open source project that could be bringing vulnerabilities into your environment, but everything that wraps around them that makes them go, right?
Exactly.
There's a lot to think about there. Yeah.
Yep.
And look, I think that, there's other things to think about too, right? What happens when proprietary software vendors, lose at the startup game of roulette, right? Over 90% of them are going to fail, are going to have to end their projects, and there will be no ongoing maintenance or support provided for them. And yet some of that software will keep on, being used inside of vendor organizations for years after maintenance has kind of dried up. And those become just a fountainhead of CVEs and security risks for those organizations. One thing that OSS has going for it is if you've got a successful open source project and you've got good maintainers, then that can be much more sustainable than proprietary software over a long period of time, because you've got people that continue to work on them, that continue to patch those issues. So yeah. And I think you've also got probably more eyeballs on that source code, right? So you got white hat folks that are looking at open source code, that are finding vulnerabilities and flaws that could be exploited at a later date, and they're being pretty proactive in taking care of those. So there's definitely some things going in the benefit column when it comes to security for OSS, but that's not to say that proprietary software is a risky thing or a bad thing. I mean, proprietary vendors of software have a lot of motivation to take care of security vulnerabilities too. I mean, they're under pressure from their market, their competitors. They're under pressure from their customers. They sign SLA guarantees and contracts. They don't want their names in the newspaper. So they hire people specifically to handle CVEs and vulnerabilities, which is something that you don't always get with the open source community, right?
Right.
Like we were talking about modern code bases that are way out of date, haven't had anybody touch them for a long time. Sometimes OSS just loses its ability to be maintained. And in fact, I saw a statistic that most open source software available today has fewer than 10 maintainers working on it. Now, Flux is not one of those situations. Most of the projects in the CNCF right now have a lot of maintainers working on them because there's a lot of demand for that software right now. But it's a lot of projects that are being kept alive by just a couple of individuals, and those can present some challenges. I think customer organizations tend to pay a little bit more attention to commercial off-the-shelf software vulnerabilities. Number one, they've got vendors notifying them, when there's a vulnerability that's known. They're frequently quick to patch. These vendors often have bug bounty programs or some kind of a VDP program that helps bring additional people to bear to do testing. And yeah, they've got specialized, employees whose job it is to make sure that that things are in tip-top shape. So it's not as if one approach or the other is necessarily better. And I guess that's kind of the result that we see here is security is haunting everybody, right? The world over. I think a couple of truisms that we can start with right here. Open source security isn't a security problem, but unpatched open source security is, right? And it requires the public maintain it for it to be patched. But proprietary software isn't the problem either. However, using proprietary software that has known vulnerabilities in it is absolutely a problem, right? But it requires that your vendor maintains that. I think the bottom line is everyone, everything, every business is going to be impacted by open source CVEs, things like Heartbleed and Shell Shock and Log4j. And one of the challenges with open source is that you get these huge user bases using it the world over in all sorts of different ways, inside of applications, inside of network infrastructure, whether it's on personal devices or it's at the corporate level. You've got these huge user bases. And when you've got a huge user base, you become a big, juicy target to bad guys who are financially motivated, and they're there to inflict the most damage or potentially reap the most benefit from the largest target possible. And so, of course, I think OSS just has a big target on its head when it comes to security. Last but not least, I guess, nobody's safe from OSS CVEs, right? Every app is really a collection of other software and all of the dependencies that go into it, everything from OS to, the images that they run on to the languages they're written in. And it's gotten really fuzzy. It's like defining your network edge for security these days, right? How do you do that when your employees work from home or from a coffee shop with internet connection, when they bring their own devices to work and use them for work-related things instead of, an authorized laptop or something like that? It's difficult to define the security edge of physical and virtual networks, but I think it's just as difficult these days to define the security edge of your software as well. There's a lot of surprises in there. So bottom line, lots of vulnerabilities in modern apps are probably unreported and untracked, and it's just a fact of life. So how do you deal with that? Well, in some ways you deal with it with regulation and restriction, and others you deal with it through good old security practices and best practices. So we're going to touch on DORA for a little bit. Interested, if somebody has heard of DORA and is already a DORA expert, let us know in the chat. We'll have you join us for the next webinar so we can teach everybody about it.
Yep.
But DORA is a new EU regulation. When you get this deck tomorrow as an audience member, you'll be able to click on the links that are in here and get some more info from it. But this is a wide-ranging and sweeping European Union regulation that's going to impact everybody, right? If you offer financial services within the EU, obviously, you're going to fall under requirements for DORA. But, and this is one that I had to read a few times, if you're a third-party service provider to European Union financial services companies, you also have significant requirements under DORA. And those requirements are going to become enforceable January of 2025. So a month or a couple months and a year from now, like it's right around the corner. Became law in January of 2023. We're sitting inside of the grace period right now where all the details get worked out while companies start to prepare for the implementation of this. But, some of the things that are interesting, if you are a content delivery network provider that provides CDN services for a European bank, you are going to be required to comply with DORA. If you're a systems integrator that helped a European bank build their network, you're going to be on the hook for this. If you are a managed security service provider that's doing email security for a financial institution in the EU, yeah, you guessed it, you're going to also be impacted by this. And the list goes on and on and on. So the whole goal of this is good, right? It is a very pure goal. It's to enhance the resilience of the entire European financial sector against risks that involve information and communication technology, referred to as ICT. And so this is an attempt to kind of fortify them and make them both more resilient, more robustly prepared for any kind of potential ICT disruptions. And the goal here is to ensure continuous, reliable operations, even in challenging scenarios. And when you kind of read between the lines of what challenging scenarios are, it could be that you are currently under attack. It could be that you are currently dealing with a cybersecurity incident. It could be that your country is at war. These challenging scenarios provide really, no hall pass or get out of jail free card for any organization that isn't prepared for these kinds of disruptions. And, that's a lot. That is a sweeping, heavy regulatory requirement.
Yeah, I mean, at a recent Gartner conference working session here in the UK, when discussing DORA and all of the implications there, one of the things that a lot of the organizations were very clear to me about was they are required to pen test to test their providers. So for example, if you're AWS or you're Azure, or if you're a CDN, that those organizations are to pen test against those to find vulnerabilities in the infrastructure that they commercially agree to. And so that is a novel new direction that I wasn't aware of before. So if you're a vendor coming in and saying, I guarantee that this is the case, is no longer good enough to meet the DORA requirements, right? So part of it is that it's not just saying, it is also proving out that yes, we have capable software services that are secure and meet DORA.
That's a market change. Yeah, a market change from the good old days of self-attestation, right? Where you could just kind of raise your hand and make a pinky promise that you didn't have any issues. You're now going to have the people who are responsible continuously pen testing your systems and your network. I think that's an every 3-year requirement, but there are some annual requirements as well for this.
There are annual, exactly. Yeah, so I mean, it's interesting, right? In the past, you would just have, in case of Weaveworks, with some of our large customers, we might have insurance liability clauses for 2 to 8 million, right? That if we fail, we've got an insurance policy. This erases a lot of that in the sense that it would be something where an organization pen tests us, we don't adhere to it, we could end up with fines, uh, you know, that are levied against us by the regulatory bodies themselves, right? So the EU or that customer. So it's changing the way of how we do business and ensure that what we provide is secure and stable. It's not just we promise and here's some insurance in case anything happens. That's new.
Indeed, it is new. And, hopefully it has its intended effect, which is to actually help put a dent in this problem. It's been an expensive problem, but, there's been a lot more carrot than stick, I guess, when it comes to some of the enforcement. So it's nice to see that some of that is changing. So there's 5 pillars of DORA. I think we're going to spend a little bit of time just talking about these. I apologize for this being blurry on your screens. If you're in the audience, didn't create this. This came from DORA. But pillar number 1 is risk management, right? So businesses are going to be required to proactively and continuously come up with plans that help reduce their risk profiles. So continuity, DR, you've got to have plans, not only plans for when things are going great, but plans for when things aren't going great. And those need to be accessible to the entire organization. They need to be shared throughout the partners that companies are going to be required to work with, all the way from the regulatory bodies down to the third-party vendors that they're partnering with. The second pillar of DORA is incident reporting, right? Reporting is incredibly important, right? I think there would be fewer successful cyber attacks, and I'm sure everybody in cybersecurity would agree with me, if there was better communication and reporting that occurred when those incidents happened, because we can learn from each other's mistakes. We can learn the TTIs, the tactics that are being used, the vectors of attack that are being used against organizations that are maybe in the same industry as I am. And so cybersecurity reporting is going to be a heavy, hard requirement. The third pillar is operational resiliency testing. So annually, these have to be performed, this resilience testing, and remediation plans need to be created for every single failure in a pen test that's conducted. The fourth pillar is, third-party risk. And again, as we were talking about, this can include MSPs, SIs, the company that's providing your domain name service, right? If you're using an outsourced DNS service, everybody needs to be subject to the oversight and is going to be required to comply with these regulations. And the fifth, although there is some of this fifth pillar that is optional, I think it's tightly woven with the second pillar, and that's intelligence sharing, right? So financial institutions through various certs and other avenues are encouraged to share threat intelligence, threat information, and data that they have about attacks, whether they've been successful, whether they were mitigated successfully, with their peers. And this is supposed to help everybody do a better job. And that is the fifth pillar of that. So just a little bit deeper dive on these ones. So this first pillar, risk management, right? It really talks about having a robust, well-documented risk management framework, having it implemented, being able to deliver greater operational resilience. And I mean, it's right in the name, right? This isn't about not getting attacked. I mean, some of those things are absolutely out of your control, but this is about being able to rapidly recover when an attack inevitably occurs, being able to get back on your feet, make your customers whole, minimize the blast radius of any damage that gets done inside your organization. And this is encouraging companies to take a risk-based approach, right? Not a ignore the risk approach, but a be prepared for the risk approach. So continuity policies, disaster recovery plans, that extend to your outsourced partners and your entire supply chain are things that are going to be required under this first pillar of risk management. The second, incident reporting. One of the things that I like is that the regulators in the EU, and they say this in all of the documentation and in this act, they understand that it's a heavy burden right now for organizations, especially those that are highly regulated, to meet all of these wide-ranging mandatory reporting requirements that touch everything from GDPR to SSM to PSD2. There's just it requires a whole nother wing of the company to be able to keep up with the reporting requirements of this. And so the DORA proposal wants to kind of group some of this incident reporting together with some of these other standards so that you don't have to add yet one more incident reporting requirement to the work that needs to be done on an ongoing basis. They're going to kind of investigate how it would be possible to set up like a singular reporting mechanism for all major security incidents that get reported by financial entities. And I think that's one of the silver linings for compliance teams that I see in this legislation is that it could potentially make the reporting requirements a little less onerous for those companies.
Yeah, I mean, it's really all the fault. If you think about any of us on this webinar, the amount of ransomware attacks that have been hit globally, I think they've recorded in Q1 of 2023, 850 organizations. That's a massive amount of attacking that was done. There was no required reporting of any of this, right? So if you had ransomware and for some reason chose not to disclose it, and this is either the organization yourself, but if you think about where you're actually getting the services from that organization, being able to have something in law that requires you to be open and public about it, it's quite powerful, right? So I'm very supportive of this in this regard.
As am I. I think that market pressures, competitive pressures, and pressures from your customers are ultimately the thing that's going to really become the forcing function for companies to do better, right? Not that I think organizations are inherently trying to avoid being responsible for their security risk and the risk that extends to their customers, but these forcing functions have a way of influencing budget and human resourcing and things that get talked about and decided upon in boardrooms across the world. So I agree. I think that this is a great step forward. Of those 850 ransomware incidents, if even a quarter of those were paid out at the average $4.2 million per incident, that's a lot of Halloween candy you could buy.
Yeah, it's pretty scary.
It is.
Theme. Yep.
So resilience testing. Now, this is one that has some real hard and fast implications for people, right? Every year, at a minimum, digital operational resilience testing programs need to be worked through. So this is going to be third parties coming in, performing testing on your resilience plans and making sure that you're actually prepared. And there's even some specific requirements for financial entities to make sure that these third-party providers are getting in on the party and testing whenever applicable their own systems, the systems that they've implemented for their customers. So as we touched on a little bit earlier, this is far-ranging and is something that's completely new. It used to be that you didn't have to worry too much about what your third-party vendors and providers were doing. You could kind of easily point a finger at them if you needed to, but now it's a family affair. Everybody's got to get in on this pen testing and on the resilience testing. I mean, just interesting stats.
the most popular target in as far as geography is concerned is the United States. It takes up a lot. Right behind that, if you combine all of the European Union plus the UK, it makes up the vast majority of the other, right? And then
Indeed.
you have Brazil and some other ones there too. But it's just interesting to understand that if you're in those locations, you are a far more interesting target for something like Lockbit, as an example, or some of the other ones that can leverage Kubernetes CVEs to be able to get in. So,
Indeed. And, the last one on this testing, every 3 years at least, you've got to undertake some significant penetration testing, right? And pen testing in this case is going to have to be done with the participation or done by any ICT third party that you're working with as well. So if you're trying to figure out what your next cybersecurity startup should be, maybe think about pen testing. There's going to be a lot of activity in that field in these years to come. Third-party risk. This is, we've been talking about the third-party risk quite a bit because this is pretty new and impactful. But third-party risk needs to be managed by the financial entities that are under these regulatory requirements. It has to be integrated into their ICT risk management framework. This can't just be something where, again, choose your partners wisely, ask them difficult questions before you, write a PO to them. This is going to be a bit more joined at the hip than that, and certainly more so than anything we've seen in the past. DORA is going to bring all of these third-party providers under direct supervision of one of 3 European supervisory authorities that oversee the financial industry. So Big Brother will be watching and making sure that third parties and the organizations that they provide those services to are doing the right thing, are performing their resilience and their pen testing, that they have their risk mitigation frameworks and plans in place, their DR plans in place, and that they are prepared for any serious security incident that could occur. So there's layers to this that I think are very interesting. Last but not least, the information sharing, right? Now, financial entities have always been really good. I mean, there's the FinCert, right, is fantastic. The world over, banks share information between their threat intelligence teams, between their network security operations teams. They write fantastic white papers about the things that go bonk in the night and worry them about the incidents that they've undergone. So I think the sharing of cyber threat information is although voluntary, something that I see these banks absolutely participating in at a higher level than they have historically. And there's probably only the healthcare industry, if I'm thinking about it, has similar information sharing within their cohort of competitors, or I guess peers, you could call them. But I see this requiring financial institutions to step their game up a little bit when it comes to information sharing. That's only going to be a good thing for everybody. All right, enough DORA, right? If you've got more questions about DORA, please put them into the Q&A panel. Visit some of the links that we're going to send in the deck here. There's a ton of information available online. Search for DORA, avoid the ones that talk about MTTR, look for the ones that talk about regulatory compliance requirements. So, why is this so near and dear to our hearts at Weaveworks? We originally created Flux. We donated it to the CNCF some years ago. We're celebrating its graduation this year. It's one of the small number of open source projects that have fully graduated from the CNCF. And it's a collection of really flexible CD and GitOps tools. It's available for everybody to use, and it is in use by lots and lots of people, over 500,000 downloads when we do updates or when Flux releases a new version. And we talk to companies all day, every day that started using Flux and then move into using some of our other solutions that can extend Flux, add capabilities to it. But Flux helps streamline the software development lifecycle, makes managing Kubernetes apps much easier than trying to go it alone, makes managing infrastructure, declarative, which is really interesting when you think about it in the context of security as well. Does cool things like keeping clusters in sync with what your configuration sources say, like, what you've declared in Git. And it does things like supporting, multi-tenancy and multi-source when you extend it a little bit. But the bottom line is it is one of those great tools out there that really helps make cloud native and Kubernetes easier for application development teams. And that is absolutely necessary if we're going to move everything forward in terms of higher velocity for app deployment, getting value into the hands of customers quicker, competing with the markets that we have to compete with, and doing more and more and more with less. Anything you wanted to add on this one about Flux?
No, let's get to the next slide, and I think I can add a little more value.
Awesome.
Yeah,
please do. GitOps principles.
All right, so I can speak about this if you'd like. So we do have GitOps principles. I think that those of you who are on the call, or maybe if you're watching this afterwards, are quite familiar with what GitOps principles are. Just to level set how we see it over here. It's that everything is declarative. And as it's quite a heavy graft to get to the point where you have a declarative environment. But it means once you've put that effort off, your payback is tenfold, right? Because you now have a resilient method to be able to recreate your environments. And then in line with that, with versioning, and we've got a great demo, MTTR demo, if you search for us on YouTube, that really talks about how to be able to move forwards and backwards in your deployment of applications or clusters based on versioning that we're doing in Git against a declarative way to do it. Now, the automatically applied, this is where Flux comes into play for us. There are, certain benefits across the board for why you would prefer Flux over others. Certainly happy to have those conversations as well with anybody. And what I will do is I'll share out a brief that we have just speaking about the benefits of Flux without speaking negatively about anyone else, because that's how we do it here. But in the general idea of things, so with GitOps principles, it's declarative, you have versioning control, and then you have a tool, a method to be able to do that automation. And keep in mind that automation with Flux, it means that you've got controllers there too. So the controllers can manage inside of your Kubernetes environment, but you will have things that are outside of your Kubernetes environment. And this is where things like our Terraform controller come into play and help you to do that type of work too. So principles of GitOps, it's not just locked into your Kubernetes environment, it also can extend out into your broader estate that you have. The software agents, our software agents for Flux run inside of the cluster. So it is a way of doing a pull instead of a push, which is very good in the sense that Flux understands your environment inside the Kubernetes environment and is then able to coordinate. And then, last actions are performed when the runtime state diverges. So this is where those agents with Flux check and they look at inside of their cluster to see, is everything where it needs to be compared to my declarative versioned reference that I'm supposed to use. So that's essentially the principle of GitOps. I understand that most of you probably know this already, But I think it's always very good to sort of cover this, and it gives me a way to then say I'm going to send out a Flux paper to all of you too, if you'd like.
Fantastic.
So let me know. Yep. Okay.
I think the second and the final ones that, as somebody who spent 10 years in cybersecurity, gives me that warm, fuzzy feeling, which is describe the entire system declaratively. And then when it diverges for any reason, right? That could be an insider threat. That can be an external attacker, or more commonly than both of those things put together, just simple human error and misconfiguration that open the door wide open for a security incident to happen. Oops, my database is now internet facing. Oops, I dropped in a /0 on my ingress. There's simple oopsies that people make all day long that open their organizations up to attack. And if you don't think the bad guys are looking for those on a continuous basis, look at Shodan, right? Look at how often your network is being scanned for vulnerabilities. It happens 24/7, even on holidays like Halloween. And so I really love the fact that GitOps inherently adds security for organizations, but it's not just security. It also makes compliance a lighter lift for people because everything's documented. There's an evidence trail. There's a single source of truth. And I have automation that catches misconfigurations and corrects them, and can even revert a system back to a healthy state if a bad guy happens to get into your environment and plants, a spooky backdoor like was done with, I don't know, SolarWinds not too long ago.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, there's,
yeah.
Yep. And they went public, right? I mean, so, who knows what else was out there. I think, some of the organizations we're working with right now keep on referencing the financial institutions, but that is because they're under the most scrutiny. They can use GitOps for their audit trails. So we have two that work very closely. They get audited by very large consultancy organizations, and having that source of truth inside of Git and OCI now as well makes it far easier for them to go through and get their audits done accurately and timely, right? So it's very, very powerful.
One of the ways that we can deliver this heightened security, this ability to make compliance a little less onerous for companies, is through a product that we launched just a few months ago called Weave Gitops Assured. Now, this is based on extending the capabilities of Flux with other open source tools, but also, wrapping it with some really important stuff that helps boost security and compliance, such as, right, enterprise grade technical support, very important. The ability to rely on the people who are building this solution and are working on making it more secure, to have your back organizationally and help you out of any kind of tangle that you might get into. Also, the ability for us to deliver really fast patches for any CVEs that get detected. And if you remember back at the beginning of this webinar, we were talking about how it's not just necessarily a Flux CVE that you need to worry about, but the container OS that it's going to run in, all of the dependencies that are necessary for that container or for Flux to function. It is like a layer cake of potential pockets for vulnerabilities.
Yeah, I mean, we for the assured version of Flux that we kick out within the 6 months that since we've launched this, I think we've done something like 14 updates to the assured image that customers can then use and enjoy. So it's not trivial, and part of the reason is it might not be a CVE in Flux, but it could be inside of the tool chain that's used to actually build Flux. So a lot of effort. The number one thing we want to do with Assured is to allow for the use of open source even even with these requirements that are coming in for DORA, now the new EU regulation that's also coming in, there's regulations that are coming in to the United States as well. But the idea is that, maybe for a large size of your estate, you can continue just to use open source, but instead of having to go to something else, usually far more expensive, that you have an option to continue to be able to use those open source tools, but it meets all the requirements, regulatory needs that you have, either internally inside of your own organization or ones that are mandated by governments or financial institution bodies. This is the idea. And so if you look at what we did with Assured, it's what are the tools that you need to be able to have as much of an end-to-end tool set that we can provide to you that's open source, right? So it's Flux, Flagger for continuous delivery, continuous, progressive delivery. It is a policy that we have that is open source as well, which is OPA based. All of these sort of combined with the addition of things like VS Code, it's enough for you to be able to guardrail, protect your estate while still using open source tools. So that's why we're doing it.
Fantastic. Kind of taking the spookiness out of using open source for your organization, and giving you things like SLA guarantees, right? Access to resources and tools, rapid CVE hotfixes, as Martin mentioned a moment ago. So there's a lot in there for especially financial institutions, but really any company that's using Flux or is thinking about moving towards continuous delivery or GitOps. It becomes kind of a no-brainer to look at this as probably your most feasible first step there.
Yeah, I mean, just to call out, I know we're a time constraint here, but just to call out very quickly, transportation has become one of the biggest targets right now. They're the ones who are looking for this. Medical, hospital, all of those are also getting targeted very, very heavily. They're also the ones that are looking for these type of solutions. So it's not just financial. I just want to, ensure that there's a lot of in the year 2023, there's a lot of threats that we didn't have to deal with 2 years ago or 3 years ago. And so this is it applies to a broad set of users of Kubernetes.
Indeed, it does. So I know that we promised a demo. We don't have time for it, so I'm going to do you one better as audience members, and I'm going to add a link to the last page in this deck. And I am going to send you to a personalized demo video of Weave Gitops Assured that you can spend about 7.5 minutes or so watching. And then you can, reach out to us with any and all questions that you've got. So we'll wrap up and then we'll add just a few questions here. Also, Martin has pasted a bit of a resource into the webinar chat as well. So take a look at that.
Yeah, and this is just your standard GitHub repo. It's a way for you to get up and running to test out what we have in Assured. If you'd like to, see what you can do with it, please, 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 if you run into issues, as is normal in GitHub, open up an issue and put it there. We've got a team here at Weaveworks who are keen to see how you progress. So.
Indeed. Thanks everybody for being with us today. No need to recap, why does this matter? I think that was pretty clear for everybody. You're under lots of pressures, regulatory ones, security ones, your customers, your competitors, and all of this, all of this is challenging to do without companies like Weaveworks to help support you along the way.
Yeah.
If you've got questions, drop them into the webinar Q&A right now. We're happy to answer them. We're going to leave you with this deck tomorrow. Everybody that attended is going to get a copy of this, and we've got some great resources to help you simplify security, simplify compliance. I'm going to add a link to a pre-recorded demo for Weave Gitops Assured. So you can go to GitHub, you can download and get running with all of our open source components through this link that Martin shared. We'll also add that to this last page. And then you can take a quick look at a demo of what that gorgeous UI looks like and how it really does make life easier, both for app development teams, platform teams, application operators. It's a fantastic tool set.
All right.
Anything else that you wanted to add?
No, Joe, just thanks for having me. I appreciate it. It was a lot of fun. So
I appreciate you joining me. Thanks, everybody out there. Hope you have a wonderful Halloween, wonderful rest of 2023. We'll see you next time.